Hi, I'm Gabe Abrams, Senior Software Engineer for the Harvard Division of Continuing Education, and today you're back for the second half of our discussion on LTIs. Our agenda is pretty simple. We're going to talk about installation, so how LTI helps tools get installed into the LMS. Second is placement, where those LTIs will show up in the LMS. Third is launch, the process of getting a user from the LMS into the LTI. And then finally, we're going to talk about what happens when a user is done with the LTI and how the LTI can pass grades, comments, other information back into the LMS through a process called passback. And then we'll, of course, wrap up with some examples and a start to end picture of what it looks like to do all of this with an app. So with LTI, we've got installation, placement, launch, and passback. Let's start with installation. There are two different ways of installing an LTI. The first one is to install it at the course level, and that is just to install it directly into a course. And if you install an LTI at the course level, the tool is just added to that one course. You can also install an LTI at the account level. So an account might be something like arts and sciences, and there's a lot of courses in it. If you install an LTI in an account, then that LTI will show up in all of the courses in that account. In order to install an LTI, you need the app's config XML. And this file looks a little daunting, but I'm going to point at a couple things as we go in this file that help the LMS understand more about the app. So everything about the app should be in this XML. So let's point to just a couple things. So here's the app title, and here is a short description of the app, just a little text description. Again, I'll point at other things as we go, but the important thing to know is that you need this configuration XML in order to install an LTI. If a tool gives you a config URL instead of an XML, that's totally fine. The URL is just something you have to visit to get the XML. So if you visit the config URL, you get the XML. The next part of LTI that we're going to talk about is called placement. And this is where your app shows up in your LMS. For all of these examples, I'm going to be using Canvas, which is an LMS. So these screenshots are taken out of Canvas. So let's talk about three different types of placement. The first one is the nav menu placement. So if you have an LTI that shows up in the nav menu, then it'll show up alongside all of the other main pieces of content and pages in your course. So you'll have assignments, grades, discussions, all the other main pages, and then your LTI app will show up in that list. The next example is the text editor placement. And if you have an app with a text editor placement, then it'll show up in a little button in the text editor. So right next to bold, italic, font alignment, you'll have a button for your LTI. And then finally, the last one is an assignment placement. And this means that when teachers or TAs are creating an assignment, they'll have a new type of assignment to choose from. It's also important to note that LTIs might have more than one placement. They might show up in the nav menu and also be a custom assignment. Or maybe they show up in the text editor and they also show up in the nav menu. And that was tool location, which is the first part of placement that we're going to talk about. And tool location is very important to classes, administrators, and technologists because you can use that information to do some pretty important things. For example, if you know the placement of an LTI, then you can verify that the tool was installed correctly. Since you know where it'll show up, if it shows up there, you know it was installed correctly. And then next, it helps us support people by building how-to guides, explaining where to find and how to use the tools. If you know where the tool will show up, it's easier to explain to people how to use the tool. And then finally, I've found that it's useful to categorize EdTech by the placement. So you might have a category of educational tools that are custom types of assignments. The next part of placement is called tool visibility. And this is really what types of users are allowed to see and use those LTIs. And that visibility is often broken up into tiers. So I'm going to talk about three different tiers. The most restrictive being admins. So that means that only teachers and TAs can see and use the tool. The next one down from that is called members, and that means that anyone in the class, anyone who's a member of the class, can see and use the tool, whether they're a student, a teacher, a TA, anybody. And then the final one is completely unlocked, and that's called public. That means that anyone, whether they're in the course or not in the course, maybe they just found the course on Google, they're all able to see and use the tool. So this is extremely important, especially if you're installing a third-party tool that has sensitive content in it. Let's say you're installing a discussion board where students are having classroom discussion on content that only people in the class should know about and should be discussing. So as a technologist, you might want to check that those third-party tools have the right visibility tier. And then next up, it's also useful if you want to control who has access to a tool. Maybe you're installing administrative tools or dashboards and things that should not be visible to students. Then you want to make sure that those tools have the admin's visibility tier applied to them. So how do we figure out what a tool's visibility tier is? This is also in the config XML. So there's a line called visibility, and in this example, we see that visibility is set to public. Let's say this is a discussion tool and we don't want everyone across the world to see the discussions. So this is a big red flag that the tool's config XML says that the visibility should be public. So before installing this tool, all we're going to do is we're going to just edit that, just by deleting the word public and putting in the word members. And now when we install the XML and we get that LTI installed into the LMS, then only members of the course are going to be able to see and use the LTI. The final part of tool placement that I wanted to talk about is whether or not a tool is enabled or disabled. So if a tool is enabled, then as soon as you install it, the tool will show up. If it's disabled, then after you install it, it'll take an extra step to be manually enabled after the fact. Why might this be useful? Technologists might install the tool as disabled so that when an instructor is ready, they can enable it on their own time. Or you might want to be checking your third-party tools. If a third-party tool starts as disabled, then you have to know that installing the app isn't enough for a course to use it. They'll have to enable it as well. And then finally, a tactic that I see used pretty frequently is you might install a disabled tool at the account level, so it installs across a whole bunch of different courses, and then each course can make the decision whether or not they want to enable that tool. This is also in the config XML. So in our example here, the enabled flag is set to true, so this tool is enabled by default. The next part of LTI is launch. And so this is the process of getting the user from the LMS into the LTI app. And the LMS in this process will redirect the user to the app and provide some extra information, which we call launch data. So that launch data will include info on the user and where they launched from, so which course that was. Some example pieces of information in the launch data might be the user's name, the user's ID, user's email, user's role, the name of the course or the ID of the course, or the current term, the current semester. And this information can be used in many great ways. LTIs can use this information to personalize the user's experience. And also, LTIs can do things like mirror the user's role in the course into the LTI roles. So if they're a teacher in the course, then they're a teacher in the LTI. If they're a student in the course, then they're a student in the LTI. The next part of the launch process is that the LMS is tasked with securing their launches. So the LMS will sign the launch data, and the LTI tool is tasked with verifying that the launch data is authentic. And that means LTI launches can have essentially single sign-on. And the final thing that we're going to talk about in LTI is passback. And that is when the user is done with the LTI app is going to redirect them back to the LMS with some extra information. So this is specifically for assignment placements. For those assignment placements, those custom assignments, they might pass back grades or comments. So let's do a recap. We start by installing an LTI into a course or an account. And then the app will show up in its placements. When a user clicks the app, the launch occurs, passing data to the app. And then when the user's done, the app will send the user back to Canvas with extra information. And this is specifically for assignment placement apps that pass back grades and comments. And that's it. Okay, so let's put all of this together in 3 different examples. The first one is going to be the label via cell assignment, which is, imagine you click an assignment and then you're prompted with an unlabeled diagram of a cell, and your task is to fill in all of the different pieces, labeling those pieces of the cell. So this LTI has an assignment placement, and when the launch occurs, that student info that's passed into the LTI is the part that's most important. So the cell assignment might use the student's name or student ID to help with that process. And then finally, because this is an assignment, we're going to be doing some pass back. We'll be passing back the score, which in this case I think would be the number of parts that the student successfully labeled. Another example would be a discussion board. And this discussion board will probably show up in the nav menu. And when the student will launch from the LMS into the discussion board, we might use some of that student information to help personalize their experience. We might use, for example, their name to put on their posts, and their email to send email notifications to those students when people respond to their posts. There's nothing to send back to the LMS in our example, so that pass back is not relevant. Our third example is YouTube, which would be a text editor placement. So imagine you click the little YouTube button in the text editor and an embed tool shows up. You choose a YouTube video, and then that YouTube video gets embedded into the page, the syllabus, whatever the content you were editing with the text editor. When that LTI launch occurs, you're taken into YouTube, but honestly, since the video is public, there's really no extra information that we needed from the LTI launch. So we're going to just probably ignore that. There's also nothing that YouTube's going to send back to the LMS, no grades, no comments, so that part's not relevant as well. So this is the whole picture for the YouTube app. Let's put it all together. Let's look at an LTI in Canvas from start to finish. So to start, we have the install XML. This is an install XML for a tool that I am currently developing. And we're going to just go ahead and check. This one's public. We want to make sure that only the members can see it, so we're going to edit the XML right there. We're going to hit save, and then we're ready to go ahead and install the app into Canvas. So we're going to open up Canvas. The way we do that is we go into a course, click Settings, and choose the Apps tab. We'll jump into the View App Configurations panel, and there's a plus app button. We'll click it, and then there's a drop-down. We're going to choose Paste XML, because we have the XML, and then we're going to continue by adding in the name of the tool. This tool is called I'm Here. Now we need the XML configuration, so we're going to go back to that file, copy it down, and then paste it into this install panel. You need a consumer key and shared secret, which are 2 secret things that the tool provider will give you. And then finally, once we've got those in, we can go ahead and click Install. And now the app is added. So now let's take a look at the placement. Since this is a nav menu item, it's showing up in our nav menu. When we click it, it launches, and that student information was passed in. So you can see the app used my name, and it also used the information on the course. And those pieces of information were passed through the launch. And that's it. Whether you are a student, a TA, a teacher, a staff member, an administrator, an app developer, whatever part of education you're working on, I hope this was useful. And also, Since LTIs play such a key role in education today, it's just good to know a little bit more about what LTIs are and how you can make sure that they'll work the way that you want them to. Anyway, thanks for joining me. Have a great day.